What do you think about President Biden accusing Vance of just being a, quote, clone of Trump? And they said, yeah, that's a good thing. We want him to be a clone of Trump.
As the Republican National Convention reaches day 3, Adam Schiff, a high-profile Democrat, has called on Joe Biden to stand down. The US Senate candidate has serious concerns about the president's ability to beat Donald Trump in November. When asked if he would consider dropping out of the presidential race, this is how Biden responded in a television interview this afternoon. Joe Biden then saying he would consider dropping out of the presidential race if a medical condition emerged. This is what the New York Times is reporting. This is an excerpt released from an interview that Joe Biden has done with Ed Gordon of BET News. So look, whether he was, backed into a corner on that, I don't know. He'd earlier said in his interview with George Stephanopoulos of ABC earlier this month that he'd only drop out of the race if the Lord Almighty told him to do so. Now he cites he would withdraw if a medical condition emerges. Let's look at how much to read into that or not with Carolyn Presutti, who is a senior Washington TV correspondent. She joins us now from Milwaukee. We'll get on to Milwaukee in just a moment, but as we're talking about Joe Biden, how much are we to read into this excerpt that's been released of an interview that he's done saying he'd consider withdrawing, Carolyn, if a medical condition emerges?
Good evening, Kate, and hello from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. You're right. That's the first time that we've heard that from President Biden. But in the analysts that I've spoken to, they have told me it's not going to matter how many different senators, how many different representatives, how many voters come forward and tell Biden that he should step down. What's going to matter is if the leaders of the Democratic Party meet with him and say, we cannot win this election with you, Joe. That's what it's going to take. So they say it's that one statement that he would have to hear, that everything they're hearing, all the polls are showing that he cannot beat Donald Trump. Then he would consider stepping down and passing the torch, assumably, to Kamala Harris, who would be a natural in line, and she could use all the money that they have raised for their campaign then to go forward with her quest to beat Donald Trump and become the president in November.
We've seen polling as well, haven't we? 65% of Democrats want Joe Biden to withdraw his re-election bid. That is 75% of adults. But, that Democrat figure's very, very high. Adam Schiff, the high-profile California Democrat, he's called on Joe Biden to drop out of the race, says he fears for the House and the Senate if Biden remains on the ticket. Are we building up to something here, Carolyn? We've been here before, of course. Are we building up to something here? Is there a deadline we should be looking at? Is there an important, meeting of minds within the Democrat Party that may see a more coordinated, mass-scale move to really encourage Joe Biden to step aside?
Well, top Democrats and analysts that I speak with have said it is a drumbeat. It is a kind of a dripping drumbeat, though. It's not like everyone got together at once and said, Joe, you need to step down, right? So it's one this week, one next week, one next week. And they say time is running out. The time to do this is now, or it was last week, right? As we get closer to the Democratic National Convention in August, time's out. And this is the Republican convention. So the time to do it may have been this week. I actually thought maybe he would step down this week because then that he would overshadow whatever was taking place here. However, that didn't happen. Doubt very much if he's going to do it today or tomorrow. Of course, with the assassination attempt on former President Donald Trump, that sent all the emphasis and all the interest to that story. So it remains a question, right? Will Joe Biden step down, and how longer can he continue to say, I won't step down? And will that be accepted by the American voter and by Democrats? Yeah. That's the real question.
And it's a question which keeps revolving, and the longer that it just revolves and doesn't go anywhere, the longer Joe Biden is in the race and the more he runs down the clock on it, which may be exactly what he and his team wants. Who knows? Tell me what's happening.
Well,
Go on.
The other question is, if I can just mention this, Kate, the other question is, does that dilute their message? So is it then a strong Democratic message that is put forward that we all are unified, or if it continues to revolve, like you say, then does that dilute their message? Does it weaken their message? to the American voter? That's the other question.
Yeah. And the other poll we saw today says that alternative Democrat candidates run ahead of President Biden by an average of 3 points across the battleground states. This is super interesting. So, battleground states, alternative Democrat candidates, anyone other than Joe Biden, polls ahead of
But
him by an
again,
average of 3 points.
it's a matter of money. It's a matter of money. Can those alternative Democrats raise the money between now and November? Very doubtful.
Or
The
could there be a
the
law
Biden
change that
Harris
means that it's not just Kamala Harris who's up for consideration? There could be a forced change, couldn't there? It's not completely out of the question.
But remember, we have a divided Congress here, so I'm not sure if that would happen. Is it up to Congress? It's probably actually up to the FCC. You know, who control the political laws. You know, in this country, the voting laws. So you know, all those are questions, but it's just that war chest that they have of so much money for the Biden-Harris campaign that someone has to consider if they're going to put someone else at the top of the ticket other than Harris.
Tell me what's happening on the ground in Milwaukee. A lot of conversations today. The conference there will focus on foreign policy, security. Tell us what's going on the ground there, and perhaps we'll ask you a little bit about what we might get from J.D. Vance later. He makes probably the biggest speech of his political career so far.
Absolutely. You are right on that. The biggest speech of his career tonight. You know, the convention's always set up so that they have various speakers during their session, which starts in about 4 hours from now. And they start out with these speakers and then they end with their powerhouse speaker, right? So tonight is J.D. Vance ending the convention. Right before him is his wife introducing him, Usha Vance, and she is a first-generation Indian immigrant to the United States. So she does bring diversity to the ticket right there. Right before her is Donald Trump Jr., the president's son. So that's how we ramp up to the end of the convention here. And the theme today is Let's Make America Strong Again. As you say, foreign policy, that is the emphasis today. I spoke with a lot of delegates about J.D. Vance's quote unquote isolationist policy toward various countries. And they tell me we don't see it as an isolationist policy. We see it as an extension of Donald Trump's policy. Yes, we don't want to be involved in foreign wars. Specifically, J.D. Vance has spoken out against the war in Ukraine and Russia. He's basically said, I don't care what happens in Ukraine. We should not have a war over this border, and the United States should not be involved. So that's definitely going to be an issue come November. But this group is unified. They are supporting him. I asked some delegates and some state reps and some state governors, what do you think about President Biden accusing Vance of just being a, quote, clone of Trump? And they said, yeah, that's a good thing. We want him to be a clone of Trump. Again, in this country, the rules, the laws, the policies are made by the president, not really the vice president. I mean, he's front center right now because he was just announced, right? But of course, it's the policies of whomever becomes president that really makes an impact on this country.